We'll turn to Exodus chapter 12, and we're going to read from there. Yahweh said to Moshe and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month is to be the first of all others for you, the first month of your year. Speak to the whole community of Israel and say, on the 10th day of this month, each of you must take an animal from the flock, one for each family, one animal for each household." And so, as you see, we have changed our parshot for today. Our parsha for today was originally Tzav, but what I did last week's and this week's traditional parsha or parshot were on the offerings. And so what I did is I combined them last week. I did the two offering ones in 1 week so that today we could present this preparing for Pesach study, because every year on Wednesday nights, I present the program for Pesach. But because a lot of you don't come on Wednesdays, there's a lot that is missed. And I really want to prepare everyone for a Mosaic, a Messianic, and an apostolic Passover. Not a traditional Jewish Passover and not a traditional Christian service. But I believe Adonai has given us both. And as you see there on the board, we're preparing for Passover. The two men are putting the blood on the doorposts of their houses, and they are preparing for the Passover. You could see the Passover lambs there that have you could see the Passover lambs there that have been slain. Is it not on the screen? Okay, there we go. The Passover lambs that have been slain, and in the first Passover, they were slain at the door of the houses, and the blood was put on the lintel and doorpost of the house. Now, the next slide is of the proposed 2019 calendar. Now, this is for reference only, so we could start preparing. And it's important for everyone here to start, please get these dates down. Rosh Hashanah is going to be on the evening of April 6th and the day of April 7th. Rosh Hashanah is going to be on April 6th and the day of the 7th. Now, go with me to chapter 12 of Exodus. Yahweh said to Moshe and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month is to be the first of all others for you, the first month of your year." What it's saying here is that the first new moon of the year is Rosh Hashanah. Now, Judaism celebrates the beginning of the year, the head of the year, on the 7th month. That's not what Adonai says. The 7th month is not the beginning of the year. It's the first month. And when is the first month? The first month of the year, the first moon of the year, is the first sliver after the spring equinox. Now, the spring equinox was on Wednesday, was the spring equinox. And so the next new moon is the head of the year, is Rosh Hashanah. Now, my vision is to restore biblical faith and doctrine, not to go back to Jewish roots. If you go back to Jewish roots start in 200 AD. Well, that's modern times. That's not ancient times. That's not Moses. That's not what they did in Yeshua's time. And so many people want to go back to their Jewish roots. There is no such thing as Jewish roots. Believers should not go back to their Jewish roots. We don't have Jewish roots. We have biblical roots, Hebraic roots. We have Mosaic roots. And Moses, over here in what we call Exodus 12:1, Yahweh said to Moshe, this month, it's the month of Aviv. This month is to be the first of all other months. It's the first month of your year, the head of the year. Head is Rosh. In fact, you probably heard me say Rosh. Shana, the year. It's the head of the year. Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year. And what we see here right now is that Rosh Hashanah for us is going to be April 6th, the evening of April 6th. So what we're going to do here is on April 6th, we're going to meet here. We're going to have an oneg that night. So on April 6th, which I believe is going to be a Saturday night, we're going to have a special oneg, ahead of the year, a new year oneg. Now, we're not going to light firecrackers, shoot guns in the air, or anything like that. In biblical New Year, you don't do that. What you do is you get together and you celebrate, and then everybody bring your shofars, and as soon as we see the sliver on the western sky, we are going to blow the shofars and bring in the new biblical year. We got to restore what Adonai gave us here in Exodus 12. By the way, once we know that Rosh Hashanah is April 6th and 7th, then we count 10 days, and 10 days is when they selected the lamb. We don't do that today because we don't have a temple, we don't have priesthood, and we don't offer a Korban Pesach. Korban is an offering of a Passover lamb, the Pascua. We don't do that. So we do have a Passover Seder, and that's going to be the evening of April 19th. So Passover night is going to be April 19th. Passover day is going to be April 20th this year. The first day of unleavened bread this year is going to be April 20th and 21st, as is the day of first fruits or resurrection day. April 20th and 21st, which is a Yom Rishon, a Sunday for us today. And the seventh day of unleavened bread is April 27th. Now, the first day of unleavened bread and the last day of unleavened bread, those 2 days are Shabbats. Those 2 days are Shabbats. They are called high Sabbaths or special Sabbaths, and they are different, and they are almost like the 7-day Sabbath, but they are special Shabbats. And which means that Resurrection Day is going to be also a Shabbat this year. Resurrection Day doesn't have to be a Shabbat if it happens at another time. Now, the next slide is the biblical calendar dates. The biblical calendar dates. Now, Rosh Hashanah is Aviv 1. In fact, Yahweh said to Moshe and to Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month is to be the first of all others for you, the first month of your year. So Rosh Hashanah is on Aviv 1. Aviv 1 is Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year. And of course, Passover is 14 days later. Passover is 14 days later on the 14th. The first day of unleavened bread is always Aviv 15. Now, what's interesting is Aviv 1 is the first sliver. The 14th and 15th are the full moon. That means Passover always occurs on a full moon, always. And then the day of first fruits is the day after the Sabbath. So every year, now again, restoring biblical Hebraic faith is very important because we're not restoring our Jewish roots. We don't want to go back to Jewish roots. If we went back to Jewish roots, the day of first fruits would be Aviv 16th. Today, Judaism does first fruits always on the 16th, always on the 16th, which is not biblical. And so we want to go biblical. We don't want to go tradition. It is tradition to follow first fruits, not on the day after the Sabbath, but on the day after the first day of unleavened bread, the 16th. And again, the seventh day of unleavened bread is always every year Aviv 21st. So on the slide, go back to the previous one, the proposed calendar. That's the proposed calendar for this year. And it follows the biblical calendar dates of Leviticus 23. Follows the biblical calendar dates of Leviticus 23. Now, it is important that we understand Leviticus chapter 23. Leviticus chapter 23 gives us all the 7 Moedim, or appointed times, appointed days, the feasts of Yahweh. So it's important that everybody studies Leviticus 23, and it specifically says there, the 14th day is Passover, the 15th day is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the next one, Bekurim, or the Feast of First Fruits, is the day after the Sabbath. And it's talking about the 7th-day Sabbath. It doesn't give a date. It doesn't say the 16th of Aviv. It says the Rosh Hashanah, the 1st of Aviv. It says the 14th of Aviv. It says the 15th of Aviv. And 7 days later, the 21st. But it doesn't say the 16th. It says the day after the Sabbath, after Passover. So we want to get back to our Hebrew roots. See, one of the most important things now that we're restoring Hebraic biblical faith and doctrine is that we connect the biblical dots. That we don't go to tradition. That we don't go to what was written 200 years after Yeshua. Judaism was born 200 years after Yeshua. A lot of people don't know that. In fact, after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, the Jews went to a little village called Yavna, and they developed a templeless Judaism. In 135, when Jerusalem was sacked and destroyed, and the Jewish people were kicked out of Israel, out of Jerusalem, then they started going to a more templeless. And years went by. By 350, they had started a whole new calendar and came up by 200, they came up with the Mishnah, the oral law. Until the Middle Ages, they came up with a Talmud, with more additions and subtractions. And so we can go back to the Talmud. The Talmud is not, the Mishnah and Talmud might be windows of how they did things at these times, but they are not our guide. And many Messianic congregations, many Christians, even Christian pastors and professors that are studying Hebraic are not going to the Hebraic. They're going to the Mishnah and the Talmud. They're going back to modern Judaism to get their facts. You don't go to modern Judaism. And by the way, modern Judaism, the Mishnah and the Talmud are dead branches. The Mishnah and the Talmud are the leaven of the Pharisees. The Mishnah and the Talmud are Jewish myths. They are not the scriptures. It is of vital importance that we find out, what does Torah say? What does Yeshua say? What does Paul say? We need to be Mosaic, Messianic, and Apostolic at the same time. Not preferring this over this, not preferring this over this. Many people go and say, well, this is what Moses said, and they stick with that. Many people say, well, this is what Yeshua said, or this is what Paul said, and they stick with one or the other. One of the most important aspects of being a believer today is that we combine what Moses, what Yeshua, and what Paul says. And so this is the biblical calendar. Now the next slide, Passover was the historic purchasing of Israel from Pharaoh and Egypt. And somebody says, what is Passover? Passover is the historic, it is history. Passover is not a myth, it's not a legend, it's a historic purchasing, a redeeming of Israel. Because Israel was enslaved by Pharaoh in Egypt. And Adonai says, set my people free. Adonai wanted to give freedom and liberty to those that were captive to the bonds of Pharaoh and Egypt. And Adonai set them free by the blood of the Lamb. And that's why it says over here in 12, go to 12 verse 3. On the 10th day of this month, each man, each what? Each man. So this teaches us, this sets up the motif that every Passover, when Passover's coming, and to prepare for Passover, each man, each believing man, each righteous man, the head of the household. And right now, I want every man here to start thinking of himself, I am the head of this household. I am the head of this family. I have this responsibility. Each man in biblical times, in Hebraic times, it wasn't the responsibility of rabbi. There was no rabbis back then. It wasn't a responsibility of priests and pastors to do a Passover at the congregation, to do a Passover at the church, to have a mass, to have a communion service, communion Sunday, to do Passovers in synagogues and hotels, to do Passovers in different places. That's not what Adonai had envisioned. Adonai envisioned every man. Every man. You see, because Hebraic faith is the responsibility of every man. And even now, every man starts thinking, what do I need to do? How do I need to prepare? In fact, every one of you men should have a Passover kit. I have a little luggage that, you just go to thrift down, get you a little luggage, or Lieber's luggage if you want a brand new one, and get you a little suitcase. And there you have your cup. You have, all the different things you need, the every aspect of it. And every year we take it out. Every year we bring it out and we use it. And then as soon as Passover's over, you put it back in your suitcase and you put it away, get ready for next year. But every man here, every person needs to start getting your Passover supplies ready. And it says on the 14th, and let's see, verse 5, a male, 1 year old. And so the lambs that they chose those days, of course, we don't do a lamb today because we don't offer a lamb because we don't have no temple. 70 AD was the last time that a lamb was selected, that a lamb was offered, and that the blood was put on the altar, and that everybody took their lamb to their house. They prepared it, they roasted it, and they ate it. Yeshua's what is called the Last Supper, which was not really his Last Supper, and he had two other meals after that. It was actually his last Passover, Yeshua's last Passover. His disciples did that. But Passover, it says there, you will take it a male, 1 year old, which is a smaller one. You may take it from the sheep or the goats, and you must keep it till the 14th day of the month, when the whole assembly of the community of Israel shall slaughter it between the 2 evenings. Some of the blood must be taken and put in the doorposts and the lintel of the houses where it is eaten. That night the flesh is to be eaten, roasted over the fire. It must be eaten with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled, but roasted over the fire, head, feet, and entrails. You must not leave any of it till morning. Whatever is left till morning you must burn. You shall eat it like this, with a girdle round your waist, sandals on your feet, a staff in your hand. You shall eat it hastily. It is the Passover in honor of Yahweh. That night I will go through the land of Egypt and strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, man and beast alike, and I shall deal out punishment on all the gods of Egypt. Ani Yahweh, I am Yahweh. The blood shall serve as a mark of the houses that you live in. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, and you shall escape the destroying plague when I strike the land of Egypt. This day is to be a day of remembrance for you. You must celebrate it as a feast in Yahweh's honor. For all generations you shall declare it a festival forever. And how long is forever? Then why was it cut off? Why did they stop doing it? And so it is time that we restore what Adonai has given us. It's time that we restore back a Hebraic, a biblical Passover, not a Jewish rabbinical Passover, not a Christian Mass, a Christian Eucharist, a Christian Holy Communion. I hope that nobody ever attends a Christian Mass, a Christian Eucharist, a Christian Holy Communion, a Christian breaking of the bread, whatever it's called, Lord's Supper or whatever. We cannot attend those. Those are forbidden to us. Why? Because they are man-made institutions. The most important thing that we need to understand is this: 2 plus 2 equals 4. 2 plus 2 equals 4. The Torah is 2 plus 2 equals 4. But Judaism is 2 plus 2 equals 5. Christianity is 2 plus 2 equals 3. Judaism has added to Torah, to Passover. Christianity has taken away from Torah and Christianity. So we must come back and say 2 plus 2 is 4. In other words, a biblical Passover has these foundational elements. Now, look at that foundational element. The lamb with unleavened bread, matzah, and bitter herbs, maror. That's it. A biblical Passover, all you have is, and from Moses' time to Yeshua's time to 70 AD, all they had was the lamb, the bitter herbs, and the matzah. That's it. There was no other additions to the ritual. Now, from the second Passover on that we're going to look at, they started celebrating the first Passover, and every Passover is a celebration of the first Passover. But where did the egg come from? Where did the salt water come from? Where did the lettuce come from? Where did the parsley come from? Where did all those things come from? Why does Christianity not have a meal? They had a meal. In fact, in Paul's time, they had a meal. In Yeshua's time, they had a meal. But why did they take the meal away? Why were things added to the meal, and why was even the meal taken away? Judaism and Christianity have both added and taken away from Torah, from Passover. It's time that we restore it. Man, it's your responsibility to restore it. And from now on, we're going to have this table here until after Passover for a whole month so that we could practice and practice and practice so that when Passover comes, even if you've never done Passover before, every one of you men could do a Passover for your family. Even if you've never done one, they're so easy to do. And so over here in chapter 12, we are told that what it is, and it's forever. Watch what verse 15 says. For 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. So for 7 days we eat matzah. That's the first day of unleavened bread to the 7th day of unleavened bread. We eat matzah. On the first day you are to clean all the leaven out of your house. For anyone who eats leavened bread from the first to the 7th day shall be cut off from Israel. By the way, it's only leaven that you get rid of. Yeast. You don't have to get rid of the beans. You don't have to get rid of the lentils. You don't have to get rid of rice. You don't have to get rid of breads that are made with no leaven. Again, that's another situation that has come up in modern times, that all of a sudden you can't almost have anything. And then they start fooling around. They do some very foolish things. You know, one guy gets all his, well, I have all this lentils or beans. I have all this beer, because remember it has leaven. And what do? I have to get rid of it? I'm not gonna. That's waste. So what they do is they go to their Gentile neighbor. Excuse me, can I sell you my leaven? And they put it in a box and they sell it to the Gentile next door. And after Passover is back, they buy it back. So nobody loses. Nobody, gains or loses. Or they do all kinds of stuff. Well, That's not what Torah says. It says get rid of the yeast. So, like right now, start looking in your cupboard. Start looking. Is there any yeast? And get it ready for the first day of unleavened bread. You throw away the yeast. You throw anything that has yeast in it because it's the days of unleavened bread. Again, you don't have to throw anything away because we don't follow tradition. We want to follow only what? Only Torah. And it goes on to say, on those days, no work is to be done. And again, their Sabbath. You are allowed only to prepare your food. The feast of unleavened bread was be kept because it was on that same day I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Keep that day from age to age as an irrevocable ordinance. Did you underline that? Did you put it in yellow? Irrevocable ordinance. Well, what authority did the Greco-Roman Christianity have to revoke it? No more Passover. We're going to change it. No, nobody has that. In the first month, from the evening of the 14th day until the evening of the 21st day, you are to eat unleavened bread. That's 8 days, by the way. For 7 days, no leaven must be found in your homes, because anyone who eats leavened bread will be cut off from the community of Israel, whether he be stranger or native born. You must eat no bread with leaven. Wherever you live, you must eat. Wherever you live, you must not eat unleavened bread. Moses summoned all the elders of Israel, verse 21, and said to them, go and choose animals from the flock on behalf of your families, and kill the Passover victim. This is the Korban Pesach. Kill the Korban Pesach. Kill the victim, the offering of the Passover. Then take a spray of hyssop, dip it in blood, and that is in the basin, and with the blood from the basin touch the lintel and the 2 doorposts. Let none of you venture out of the houses till morning. Then when Yahweh goes through Egypt to strike it and sees the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts, he will pass over the door and not allow the destroyer to enter your homes and strike. You must keep this ordinance for all time, for you and your children. And when you enter the land that Yahweh is giving you as he promised, you must keep to this ritual. And when your children ask you, what does this ritual mean? You will tell them, it is the sacrifice of the Passover in honor of Yahweh, who passed over the houses of the sons of Israel in Egypt to strike Egypt, but he spared our houses. Now, the next slide is the 3 elements that you need: the roasted lamb, the unleavened bread, and the bitter herbs. Now, the roasted lamb, of course, we do not have today because we don't have a temple. So we do not offer a lamb. But in every Passover plate, there is a zeroah. A zeroah is a shank bone of a lamb. And you will, afterwards, you're welcome to come and see the one that we have here, a shank bone of a lamb. This is a reminder that in biblical times, we had a lamb. We don't have a lamb until the future. By the way, in the kingdom, all the sacrifices, all the feasts will be reinstituted, and Passover again is going to be reinstituted, and we will have a Passover lamb sacrifice in the millennium, in the kingdom of Elohim. And of course, the unleavened bread and unleavened bread, matzah bread, all that is tortillas. That's what they are. Today, we have a box of the matzah that is sold in stores. You could either use that, or Men and ladies too, but men, you could make your own tortillas. And one of the nights on Wednesday night, we actually have a class on how to make unleavened cakes, uh, unleavened little discs. And of course, the bitter herbs. Now, all it says is bitter herbs. You could use anything for bitter herbs. Most people, in fact, we have a little jar of horseradish there. Most people use horseradish because it's pretty bitter. But you could, and again, it says bitter herbs. So what some people do is they just get a mixture of bitter herbs, and either you could just chop them up, or you could even go and get some horseradish and chop it up, grate it, and make your own mixture. Some people use dandelions. You could even, any kind of bitter uh, type leaf of even some of your vegetables, and if you eat some of the leaves, say you get some beets and get the leaves and cut them up and make a paste with them. They're pretty bitter, but you could do anything for that. All it says is bitter herbs. And of course, the lamb is a reminder um, of the first lamb that was sacrificed. The unleavened bread is a reminder of the haste. Remember, the first Passover, they had to wear sandals. They had to get their staff. They ate it standing up because of the haste. And the unleavened bread is the bread of haste. The My mom used to call it the lazy bread. And when she would make these breads, these loaves, she would call it lazy bread because it's real fast to do, and it's for lazy, I guess, lazy people that don't want to spend all the time having the bread to rise and all that. You do it real fast, and 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 I still remember those cakes of unleavened bread she would make, and of course you could make either the cakes or the tortillas, uh, and the bitter herbs were the symbol of the bitterness of slavery, the bitterness of us being slaves. Now, each Passover, now, the next slide, is a yearly celebration that recalls the first Passover. Each subsequent Passover after the one in Exodus, and go with me to the book of Numbers. We're going to be looking at Numbers 9, and Numbers chapter 9. And here in Numbers chapter 9, verse 1, Yahweh spoke, and this is when we were at Sinai. Our ancestors were now at Sinai. It had been 1 year since the first Passover. We had come to Sinai. We had been at Sinai. And there at Sinai, verse 1, Yahweh spoke to Moshe in the wilderness of Sinai in the second year after the exodus from Egypt. In the first month, he said, let the sons of Israel keep the Passover at its appointed time. At its what? Appointed time. In other words, Passover is an appointment. I'm going to say this very strong. Passover is an appointment that every one of you men have to keep. You have an appointment on Aviv 14th in the evening, which is April 19th in the evening for us. Every man here has an appointment to keep Passover. Now, if you don't keep Passover that night, you're in trouble. If you don't keep Passover, you're in trouble. Most people today do not realize the seriousness of what it means to be Torah-based believer. We must be Torah-based believers. Today we are casual believers because sometimes even a little sniffle, oh, I got sniffles, I can't go to church, And so little things sometimes stop us from doing what Adonai commands us to do. And so Passover is an appointment. It's a reservation. Please reserve that date. Right now, when you go home, go to all your calendars on the evening of the 19th, which is a Friday night. Say, I have an appointment as soon as the sun goes down, we have to keep Passover. Now, if you don't have a place or you can't keep it, or you're single, you're widowed, you're divorced, Scripture says then you could hook up, you could get together, you could come with another family. Families, if you're doing Passover and you have extra seats on the table, there's people that want to be part of your Passover. If you don't have a place, find a place. If you have a place, find others that would come and join you as well. And then it goes on to say that the sons of Israel keep the Passover at its appointed time. It's Moed, the 14th day of the month, not the 13th day, not the 15th day, not on Wednesdays when there's more people, or on the weekend when it's convenient for everybody. I am so troubled by Messianic and Christian churches setting up Passovers whenever they want. On Wednesdays, on Saturdays, well, it's Sundays, it's more. Well, no, you can't do that. Adonai has given us an order. Follow this ritual. It goes on to say, you must keep it with all the laws and customs proper to it, the mishpatim and chukim proper to it. And the date is one of the mishpatim, that is one of the laws. You cannot make up your own laws and guidelines for Passover. We have to follow what it says. Moses gave orders for the sons of Israel to keep the Passover. They kept it in the wilderness at Sinai in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, between the two evenings. The sons of Israel did exactly as Yahweh had ordered Moses. Let me ask you, are you going to do exactly as Yahweh ordered Moses? Not Rabbi Akiva, not Rabbi Judah Hanisi, not Rabbi Ishmael, not Rabbi Simeon, not Gamliel, not Hillel, but Moses. Because only Moses received the word from Adonai. None of the other rabbis received from Adonai. They made it up themselves. They've come up with their own 2 + 2 = 5. But Adonai is not happy with 2 + 2 = 5. He's not happy with 2 + 2 = 3. And it goes on to say there in verse 10, Yahweh spoke to Moses and said, this is what you are to say to the sons of Israel. Verse 6. It happened that certain men had become unclean by touching a dead body, and so they could not prepare, and they could not keep the Passover that day. They came that same day to Moshe and Aaron and said to them, we have become unclean by touching a dead body. Why should we be forbidden to bring an offering to Yahweh at the proper time with the rest of the sons of Israel? And Moses answered them, wait here till I have orders from Yahweh gives to you. Yahweh spoke to Moses and said, say this to the sons of Israel, if anyone among you or your descendants becomes unclean by touching a dead body or is on a journey abroad, he can still keep the Passover for Yahweh. Such a person shall keep it in the 2nd month on the 14th day between the 2 evenings. They are to eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Nothing must be left over till the morning, nor must you break any of its bones. They must keep the Passover exactly according to the Paschal ritual, the Korban Pesach ritual. But if anyone who is clean or who has not been on a journey fails to keep the Passover, he shall be outlawed from his people. He has not brought the offering to Yahweh at its appointed time and must bear the burden of his sin. If a stranger is living among you and keeps a Passover for Yahweh, he must keep it according to the laws and customs. There is to be only one law among you for the native or the stranger. And so it's important that if you cannot keep Passover on the 14th for some emergency, unclean on the journey, you could keep it not the next day, not next week, but you must keep it for 1 month on the 14th day of the second month, and it must be according to the ritual. And again, it's important that if you keep Passover, it has to be kept this way. But if you don't want to keep Passover, then Adonai excommunicates you. So each Passover, since the time of Moses till 70 AD, was a celebration that recalled the first Passover. Now, the next slide. Passover is the day Yeshua inaugurated the new covenant and died for the sins of mankind. On Passover night, Yeshua did the Passover, and on Passover day, he died for the sins of mankind. Now, the next slide is the Passover and resurrection of Yeshua. And this is how it occurred. On the 14th, Aviv 14th, which is the fourth day of the week in Yeshua's time, it was a Tuesday night at twilight. Remember, Yeshua did not die on Good Friday. There's no such thing as Good Friday. And Yeshua did not rise on Easter Sunday morning. Good Friday and Easter Sunday are Christian inventions. Now look at this. The Jews have come up with all kinds of inventions. The Gentiles have come up with all kinds of inventions. Both of them had added and take away. They've invented Judaism. They invented Christianity. And we've been following the wrong way, whether Jew or Gentile, for 2,000 years. It's time that we come back and get restored. It was a Tuesday night at twilight, the fourth day of the week, that the Passover celebration in the upper room after sundown. After that, he goes to Gethsemane about 1 a.m. That means from sundown to about 1 a.m., 2 a.m., someplace around there. Yeshua prepared the Passover, they roasted it, they ate it, and then he goes to Gethsemane about 1. He's arrested about 3. He goes to trial before the Sanhedrin about 4 a.m., which would have been an illegal trial. And the trial before Pilate was about 6 a.m. when the Romans started their day. The trial before Herod about 7. The final trial and condemnation by Pilate about 8 a.m. Yeshua was crucified at 9 a.m. He died at 3 p.m. at the Hara after he was brought down from the cross, and he was ready for burial. On the 15th, which would be a Wednesday to us, a Wednesday night to us, at sundown, the 5th day of the week, Yeshua was buried between the 2 evenings. So Passover was between the 2 evenings. The next day, the burial was between the 2 evenings. Now on the 16th and the 17th, Thursday and Friday, Yeshua was in the grave. And then on Aviv 18th, what we call Saturday night at sundown, Yeshua actually rose on what we call today Saturday night. You see, Saturday night in biblical times did not start at midnight. The days do not start at midnight. They start at sundown. So at sundown, what we call Saturday night is when Yeshua rose. And the biblical Saturday night is the modern Gregorian Saturday night is the biblical first day of the week. So yes, Yeshua did rise on the first day of the week, but on the first day of the biblical week, not the first day of the Greco-Roman week. In fact, when the women came to the tomb, it was still dark and he had already risen. So he rose as the sun went down on Saturday night, And the first day of the week, Yom Rishon started, Yeshua rose. And that is what we call Resurrection Day, or the Day of First Fruits. Paul talks about Yeshua being the first fruits. And again, we're going to talk more about this later on. Now, the next slide, the protocols of a Mosaic, Messianic, and Apostolic Passover Seder. So, what we're going to do on every Wednesday night and Tuesday nights and Friday mornings for the men, because remember, men, because of your responsibility, we have added extra days here so that you who are responsible to pass on the faith and doctrine to the next generation, to your wives and to the next generation, you have more ample time to study. You actually have men here at this congregation, you have 4 days of class. You have Shabbat morning, you have Tuesday night, you have Wednesday night, and you have Friday morning. Women here have Shabbat morning and Wednesday night to come and study. But men, because you are responsible, women are not responsible to keep Passover. They're participants in Passover, but women, you don't have no responsibility to keep Passover. The responsibility is on the men of the community, the men of faith. And every husband here, every head of household, it is your responsibility. And so we're going to be teaching the protocols. How do I do this? What can I do? What should I not do? What should I eat? What should I not eat? All those we're going to be teaching, and I want men and women to make sure they come here on a Wednesday night. Next slide. Now, Passover, since the Messianic New Covenant was instituted. Again, this is where Judaism and Christianity have added and taken away. Today, there is no such thing as a true Messianic New Covenant Passover. We are resurrecting it. We are bringing it to light. And every year, Adonai teaches us different things. Next slide. Here is some pictures of a traditional Jewish Seder. And notice that they all have books. And what they do in a Jewish Seder, and everybody has a book, and they just read. They don't know the Passover, so they just read it. If you go to a traditional Jewish Seder at a home or at a synagogue or any place, they'll read it from a book. Everybody has a book and they read it. Now, to start off, we call that's good training wheels. How many of you had training wheels in your bike when you started? We all need training wheels. So if you need a book, that's perfect. But those of you that as you grow older in the faith, all of a sudden we don't need a book. You see on the top left-hand corner an old rabbinic Seder, and at the bottom the traditional Seder plate. On the top right, you see the matzah ball soup. What does matzah ball soup have to do with Passover? Nothing. It's just tradition. It's just like pozole at Christmas time or turkey at Thanksgiving and ham on Easter Sunday. Those are just traditions. And by the way, matzah ball soup is only a tradition among the Ashkenazi. The Sephardic have empanaditas and they have other things. And of course, at the bottom right, you have the 4 glasses of wine in the traditional matzah. Everyone is to drink 4 glasses of wine at Passover, and which is not what we would advise here. And so please do not have 4 glasses of wine at Passover. In biblical times, they had 1 cup of wine, and they shared it among everyone. And it was a sharing thing. And so that's the traditional. In the Christian view, the Mass is the center. The Mass is the center of Christian Passover. The Mass is the Christian Passover. And again, every Protestant follows the Catholic Mass. Even though they do it differently, look at the one on your upper left. That is the monstrance, and that is the a piece of bread, what they call the host or the victim, the Korban Pesach. And you see the spires, that's the sun disk, and this piece of bread, this Korban Pesach, is actually worshipped as the body of Yeshua. And the priest raises it up, and everybody bows down. I don't know if anybody remembers the monstrance, and it has a little door in the back, and you every time you do it, you put a new giant, the extra long, big post in there, and as the priest raises it up, people bow down. As you can see in the bottom, this is a people passing out leavened bread, and back on your right also, they have leavened bread. A lot of people use leavened bread, and watch what it says. Remember me. Wait a second. Oops. Didn't Yeshua use unleavened bread? Aren't these the days of unleavened bread? Oops. And of course, on top, you see one form with a little cup of grape juice, and that looks like a little square cracker. Some of them use even smaller some of you that grew up in Baptist or Christian churches, remember the little small one, very small little piece. Um, and so these are the traditional ways that people celebrate Passover today. But I propose that the rabbinic Jewish Seder is not biblical. The Christian communions, Eucharist, whether they're Catholic or Protestant, are also not biblical. One of the things that we're going to be looking at is the origin of Easter, the origin of some of the traditions, especially within Christianity, that have to do with Passover. In fact, Easter Sunday in the Catholic Church and the Christian churches, Easter Sunday is actually Passover Day. They call it Passover Day, La Pascua. And so a lot of things have been mixed up. And let's go to the final slide, the proposed 2019 calendar. Hopefully, everyone will take this calendar and please take a picture of it. Make sure you put it on April 6th. We're going to meet here, and we're going to have an oneg, and we're going to wait for the new year, and then we'll have a new year prayer and blessing. Passover the 19th. Hopefully, every man here does a Passover. And if you don't have a place for Passover, especially if you're a lady and you don't have a place for Passover, and please let Kendra know, and we'll start finding a place for you. If you have an extra room, and I would encourage you, if you have an extra room, please, an extra table, an extra chair, extra plate, please let us know so that we could put both together. Well, let's go ahead and stand. Father, we thank you for the opportunity that we have to be here. We pray that your Ruach HaKodesh, Father, might allow us even now to study these things to see if these things be so. What I said, Father, I pray that everyone goes back to try to connect those dots. And if, Father, there is misunderstanding, I pray that on Wednesday nights, that questions could be asked, that we could midrash, Father, and do a teaching and questions and answers, and so that we know what we're doing biblically, not rabbinically, not Christianly, but biblically, Hebraically. In Yeshua's name. Amen. Yevarechecha Yahweh va'ish merecha. A'ir Yahweh panav elecha v'chunecha. Asa Yahweh panav elecha v'yasem lecha.